The gavel struck the stone table 3 times and the sound echoed through the great hall like a death bell. I stood alone at the low platform in the center of the room, my hands folded behind my back, my uniform pressed sharp. 12 alien faces looked down at me from the high seats above. They were not kind faces. They had never been kind, not really. But today they were something worse than unkind. Today they were finished with us. My name is Eli Brand, and I was the last human voice the galactic conquered ever agreed to hear. I had flown 18 days across 3 systems to stand in this chamber on Thessery Prime. I had not slept more than 4 hours any night of that journey. My throat was dry. My heart was steady. I already knew what they were going to say before the high speaker opened his long gray mouth. "Human delegate," he said. His voice was smooth as oil and just as cold. "The conquered has reached its decision." I did not nod. I did not bow. I only looked at him straight and level, the way my father taught me to look at men who were about to lie. "For 300 years, the High Speaker went on, your species has been granted the honor of walking among the stars with the elder races. You have been given trade rights. You have been given protected space. You have been given a seat at the outer ring of this conquered. And in return, you have brought disorder. You have brought unrest. You have bred faster than permitted. You have pushed into regions that were closed to you. You have formed bonds with lesser client species that were not yours to befriend. I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my face still. "The vote has been cast," he said. 9 in favor, 3 against. Humanity is hereby removed from conquered membership. Humanity is hereby barred from all shared space beyond the Sol cluster. You will have 400 standard days to withdraw. Every ship, every citizen, every outpost, and every tool of human make from conquered territory. After that day, any human vessel found outside your home cluster will be considered a hostile intruder." There was a long silence. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the soft hum of the chamber's old air system. I could hear, somewhere far above me in the galleries, the quiet laughter of a Vihari noble who had waited a long time for this moment. The High Speaker leaned forward. "Do you understand the ruling human?" I took one slow breath, then I spoke in. My voice did not shake. "I understand it. Do you accept it?" "I am not here to accept or refuse," I said. "I am here to carry your words home. My people will decide what to do with them." A ripple passed through the seated council. They had expected me to beg. They had expected me to argue, to plead, to threaten, to weep. Some of the younger humans in my own delegation had wanted me to do exactly that. But I had been told by my mother long ago that when a man is standing in front of a wall, the worst thing he can do is pound his fists against it. Walls do not care about fists. Walls care only about the quiet tools that go around them or under them. So I did not pound. I only turned and I walked out of that chamber with my back straight and my hands still folded behind me. I did not look at the Vihari. I did not look at the Aloni. I did not look at the Tesh, who had hated us longest of all. I walked out into the pale blue sun of Thessery Prime, and I got onto my ship and I sent a single coded message home. The message was 3 words. It is done. The journey back to Earth took 21 days. I spent most of it alone in my cabin, reading old reports and drinking weak T. I expected to feel angry. I was surprised instead to feel something like relief. For my whole life I had watched my people fold themselves into smaller and smaller shapes to fit into rooms that were never built for them. We had been told not to build certain engines. We had been told not to study certain sciences. We had been told to slow our birth rate, to close our factories, to let other species lead the frontier missions, because our style was too forward, and we had done all of it. We had bowed and we had smiled and we had said, yes, yes, we will fit ourselves to your rules. And now at last the rules were being taken away, not by us, by them. When I landed at the main spaceport outside Geneva, I expected to find crowds. I expected to see angry signs and shouting voices and news drones hanging in the air like flies, but the streets were quiet. People were going to work, children were walking to school. Woman was selling warm bread from a small cart near the transit gate, and she waved at me as I passed. I stopped. I asked her if she had heard the news. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile. We heard it this morning, sir. And nothing, sir. The bread still needs to be sold. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I laughed, a real laugh, the first one I had laughed in months. I bought a loaf of her bread and I walked the rest of the way home on foot. My mother was waiting for me on the porch of our old house in the hills. She was 78 years old and she had built ships for 40 of those years before she retired. She stood up when she saw me, and she walked down the stone path and she took my face in both her rough hands. You did well, Eli, she said. I did nothing, I said. I stood there and I took it. That is what doing well looked like. Today, I shook my head. Mother, they have thrown us out. They have taken everything. 3 centuries of work, of trade, of mapping their space and building their stations gone. We have 1 year to pull back behind the Saul gate and never come out again. She looked at me with her pale gray eyes, and she smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was not a bitter smile. It was the smile of a woman who has been waiting a very long time for something to finally happen. Good, she said. I blinked. Good. Good, she said again. Now we can finally build what we have been holding back. I did not understand her then. I thought she was tired or that she was trying to comfort me with strange words. I kissed her forehead and I went inside. And I slept for 14 hours straight for the first time in a year. But that night I dreamed of doors closing, great heavy doors made of something stronger than metal, swinging shut one after another, sealing off a long hallway, and behind each closing door I could hear something breathing, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, something that was just beginning now to wake up. I did not know it yet, sitting there in the dark of my childhood bedroom, but my mother's words were not the words of an old woman giving comfort. They were the words of an engineer who had seen this day coming since before I was born. They were the words of a species that had been listening quietly for 300 years to every rule that was given and writing each one down and studying each one and finding the exact shape of the cage. And now at last the cage was being opened from the wrong side. The conquered thought they had punished a child. They thought they had swept a difficult guest out of their parlor and bolted the door. They thought the story was over. The story had not yet begun. In the morning, my orders came through. On the quiet channel, I was being pulled off the diplomatic track and reassigned. The message was short and it did not explain itself, but I knew the voice of the man who had written it. He was an old friend from the academy, and he worked in a place most people did not know existed. The message said only this: come to the Uwat station, bring nothing, tell no one, there is work to do. I packed a small bag, I kissed my mother goodbye. I did not look back at the house as my transport lifted off, because I somehow already knew, deep in my bones, that the next time I saw that porch I would not be the same man standing on it. The withdrawal had begun. The order to withdraw went out to every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost in conquered space on the same morning. I was not in Geneva when it happened. By then I was already at the Uwat station, a place that, according to every public map of the solar system, did not exist. It sat far out beyond the orbit of the last cold world, hidden inside a hollowed piece of rock the size of a small mountain. The only way to reach it was to know it was there. The man who greeted me at the docking bay was called Henry Ashford, and he had been my instructor at the academy 20 years before. He was thinner now, and his hair was fully white, but his eyes were the same, sharp, awake, amused by something only he understood. Eli, he said, shaking my hand. Welcome to the quiet room. The what? You will see. He walked me through 3 sealed doors, each one requiring a different kind of check, a handprint, a voice phrase, and at the last door, a long look into a small blue lens that I think read something deeper than my face. When the final door opened, I stepped into a hall that stretched further than I thought the asteroid could hold. It was full of people, engineers, physicists, doctors, builders, all working quietly and steadily on things I could not at first make sense of. I saw a woman standing at a large clear wall, drawing lines of light on it with her fingers. The lines formed the shape of a ship, but the ship had no visible drive. I saw 2 men arguing softly over a small black cube that seemed to bend. The light around it, I saw a room through a glass partition full of what looked like sleeping children in soft blue tanks, except the children were not children, and I was not sure they were sleeping. Henry watched my face as I took it all in. You are wondering, he said, how long this has been here? Yes, 260 years. I stopped walking. Eli, he said gently, come sit. I will tell you the story, your history. Books did not tell you, and then I will tell you what you're going to do about it. He took me to a small room with 2 chairs and a pot of real coffee, the kind grown in the mountains of old Earth, not the fast kind made from protein paste. He poured me a cup. He sat down across from me, and he began to speak. He told me that when humans had first entered conquered space 300 years ago, we had been eager, we had been new, we had wanted so badly to be accepted that we had agreed to almost every rule they put in front of us. Slow down our ship drives, they said, agreed. Do not build thinking machines past a certain level, they said, agreed. Do not research the folding of space, they said, agreed. Do not breed past a certain rate, agreed. Do not live past a certain age, they said, because longer lives would strain shared resources, agreed. We had agreed publicly to all of it. And then quietly, in rooms like this, One, we had disagreed. We never stopped, Eli, Henry said. Not one of those lines of research. We only hid them every time the Concord banned a science, we moved it underground. Every time they said no, we said yes, but in whispers. For 3 centuries, we have been building in the dark the very things they told us we could not have. I put my cup down. My hands were not quite steady. Why, I asked, why did we not push back openly? Why did we hide? He smiled. Because we are a patient species, though we do not look it. Because the men and women who started this program understood something that the Conquered did not. They understood that a cage is only useful if the bird believes in it, and our leaders long ago decided not to believe. And now, he said, the bird has been pushed out of the cage by the hand that built it. We have been ordered to leave. We have been ordered to close our borders and vanish. Do you understand, Eli, what they have just given us? I did not answer. I was beginning to understand, but I wanted to hear him say it. They have given us, he said, permission to finally come out of the dark. That night I could not sleep. I walked the halls of the UAT station, looking through windows into labs and workshops I had never imagined could exist. I saw engines that folded space the way a hand folds paper. I saw medical systems that could regrow a human arm in 6 days. I saw grain patterns locked and sealed, vaults that could feed a planet for a year from a single field. I saw thinking machines, calm and slow, and gentle, that spoke in soft voices, and called the scientists by their first names as if they were old friends. 300 years of hidden work, 300 years of quiet patience, 300 years of nodding along to rules we had already decided to outgrow. And now we were going to use it all. My new orders came the next morning. I was being placed in charge of the Kepler corridor evacuation, 42 human colonies, spread across a long, thin stretch of space holding almost 20 million people. My job was to pull every one of them home before the 400-day deadline, but that was only the visible part of the job. The hidden part, the part that no other species was to ever hear about, was different. We were not just evacuating, we were stripping every station we had ever built in. Conquered space was human design, human metal, human thought, every relay, every orbital ring, every weather grid, every farming tower. We had built all of it, and we were going to take all of it back, not destroy it, take it piece by piece, bolt by bolt, plate by plate. 300 years of infrastructure quietly packed up and loaded onto transport ships and sent home. The Conquered would not stop us. They had ordered us to remove every tool of human make. They had written it into their own ruling. They had not understood what that really meant. I flew out to the Kepler corridor with a fleet of 2,000 transport ships and a quiet smile on my face. The first colony I reached was a small farming world called Harlow's Reach. The people there had been told what was coming. They were ready. They met me on the landing field, and their leader, a broad woman named Meg Foster, shook my hand and handed me a list. Every piece of human equipment on the planet, top to bottom. Every tractor, every water pump, every solar panel, every medical bed, every piece of wiring in every wall. All of it, sir, she asked. All of it, I said. She nodded once firmly and turned to her people. You heard the commander. Begin the pull. For the next 12 days, Harlow's Reach was taken apart. The humans worked in long, steady shift, dismantling their own world with the same care they had used to build it. The fields were stripped of their machines, the houses were emptied of their systems, the weather stations were pulled down from the hills, even the water pipes were cut, coiled in, loaded into crates. On the 10th day, a Concord observer ship came to watch us. It hung in orbit, blinking its cold lights. Its captain, an Ohlone officer in a gray sash, hailed me on an open channel. "Commander Brandt," she said in that careful way the Ohlone had, "you appear to be removing more than your ruling requires." Farm machines were not listed among the compliance items. "They are human-made," I said. "They are rooted in your client colony. They could be left for the incoming population." I smiled into the camera. The Concord ruling was clear, "Captain, every tool of human make, we are being thorough." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Very well, Commander," and she signed off. On the 13th day, the last transport lifted from Harlow's Reach. I stood on the ramp of my command ship and looked down at the empty world. The houses were still there, the roads were still there. The shape of what we had built was still visible, like the outline of a body under a blanket, but everything that had made it work, every living system, every engine and pump and wire was gone. The fields were going brown already. The weather without the grids was beginning to turn. I felt a strange pinch in my chest. Meg Foster stood beside me. She felt it too. I could see it on her face. "They will not be able to hold this world," she said quietly. "No," I said, "they will not." "Good," she said. And we lifted off. Over the next 10 months I watched the same thing happen 42 times. Every colony we left behind was stripped clean of human work. The elder races had always praised us for how clever we were with infrastructure. They had never asked how much of their own new territory was built on top of ours. Now they were finding out, one dying world at a time. On some worlds the pull was harder. On a place called New Lagos, a young engineer named Clara Downs wept as she pulled the central control rod out of the planetary weather grid. She had designed that grid herself 12 years before. She told me as we rode the lift back up to the transport that within a month the storms would return to the equator, and within a year the ice would come back to the northern belt. I asked her if she wanted to leave one small part of it behind, just to spare the incoming Ohlone settlers some of the worst weather. She looked at me with red eyes and she said, "Sir, they voted to throw us out. They can have the planet. They cannot have my work." I did not argue. I carried her control rod home myself. By the end of the 10th month, the Concord began to understand what was happening. Their news channels, which I could watch from my command ship through a slow, deep link, began to fill with worried voices. Food shortages on Harlow's Reach, storm damage on New Lagos, power failures on 7 other human-built colonies, old relay stations going dark one by one. The Ohlone High Counselor gave a long, angry speech about human spite. The Vihari Senate demanded that we leave at least the basic utilities in place. The Tesh said nothing, but their warships began to shadow our transports more closely. But the ruling was the ruling. They had written it themselves, every tool of human make, withdraw, comply, leave. We were leaving. On the 398th day, I stood on the bridge of my flagship, the last human vessel still inside conquered space. Below me on the screen, the final transport was lifting from the last human station, a long thin relay tower called Ashwell Point. It had been built 240 years ago. It had carried messages across half the galaxy, and now it was a cold, empty needle hanging in the dark. My communications officer, a young woman named Alice Whitmore, turned in her seat. Sir Conquered Hail, Ambassador. Level. Put it through. The face of the high speaker appeared on the main screen, older now, grayer, a little less smooth. Commander Brandt, he said, humanity has complied. The galaxy will remember your dignity in this difficult withdrawal. I looked at him for a long moment. I did not smile, I did not frown, I only spoke. The galaxy will remember something. High Speaker, I said, but it will not be that. And I cut the channel. We crossed the last border of conquered space 6 hours later, and we did not slow down until the light of our own sun grew warm and yellow on the hull of the ship. Home was waiting, and home had been busy. The last human ship came home on the morning of day 400, and by evening of that same day, we closed the gate. I was there when it happened. They had wanted me on the council platform because I had been the one who carried the conquered ruling home, and they said it was fitting that I also be there when the door was shut behind us. I did not feel fitting. I felt small. I stood at the edge of the platform in a clean dress uniform, and I watched a gathering of scientists and engineers do something no species had ever done before on purpose. The Saw Gate was the oldest wormhole anchor in human space. It had been built 290 years ago, back when we were young and eager, and it had been our main doorway to the rest of the galaxy ever since. Every ship that had ever left our home cluster had passed through it. Every message, every trader, every visitor, every friend. It was a ring of dark metal and pale light 4 km across, hanging in orbit between the Earth and the Moon, and on that evening it was going to die. Not break, die, a controlled collapse. Slow and careful, planned down to the last second. The lead engineer was a small, gray-haired woman named Dr. Ruth Langley, and she spoke into the open channel in a calm, steady voice. Begin the fold sequence, phase 1. Stabilization, pull the outer ring. Power. On the screen before me, the great ring began to dim, then to flicker, then at a careful rate to fold inward on itself. It did not explode, it did not flash, it simply grew smaller and smaller and smaller, the way a piece of paper shrinks when you crumple it in your hand, except that the paper was made of space itself. In 12 minutes, there was nothing left. Not a ring, not a shimmer, not a single thread of the tunnel that had connected Saul to the galaxy for nearly 3 centuries. Only empty space, quiet and cold in hours. And while the Saul Gate was being closed, the same thing was happening at the 11 other gates in our home cluster. Every door, every back path, every way in or out, all of them folded, all of them gone. When the final confirmation came through, a cheer should have gone up. Cheer did not go up. The platform was silent. Dr. Langley took off her small, round glasses, wiped them on her sleeve, put them back on, and then she said in the same calm voice, "That will do it. We are alone now." I stood there for a long time, looking at the empty place where the gate had Ben, I could still see the shape of it. In my mind, I could still hear, if I listened hard enough, the slow hum of it, a sound I had known since I was a boy, when my father had taken me up to the viewing platform on my 8th birthday to watch a trade ship pass through. Gone now, all of it. The conquered heard about it within hours. They were already angry about the stripping of their worlds, about the relay towers we had taken, about the weather grids that had gone dark. But this was different. Closing a gate was not something the elder races did lightly. A gate once closed like this could not be reopened from the outside. The physics did not allow it. Whoever closed a gate closed it for good, unless they chose to build a new one from the inside. 5 conquered ambassadors tried to reach Earth in the first week. Their signals were sent through the long way, the slow way, the old way, using deep beam communication that took weeks to cross the distance. Each signal said the same thing in different words: reopen the gates, this is too far, this is not what was meant. Come back to the table, talk with us. We did not answer, not one reply, not one word. My new orders came on the 5th day. After the closing, I was to report to a station I had never heard of before, in the outer belt of Saturn's rings. The name of the station was Aegis Omega. The man signing the order was the president of the Terran Union himself. When I arrived at Aegis Omega, I was surprised to find my sister waiting for me at the docking bay. Her name is Hannah Brandt. She is 3 years older than me. She had been a quiet, careful child, the kind who read books when other kids were running outside, and she had grown into a quiet, careful woman who worked in a field I had never fully understood, quantum field research. She always called it in the same voice you would use to say, I clean floors. She never talked about her job, not once, in 30 years of family dinners. Now she hugged me hard and she said, "Welcome to the real work, Eli. What is this place, Hannah? This is where we build the future." She took me on a tour that lasted 3 days. She showed me things that made the hidden labs of the Hewitt station look old-fashioned. She showed me an engine the size of a dinner plate that, she said, could push a ship across the distance between 2 stars in under an hour. She showed me a medical chamber that could repair the heart of a dying patient by growing a new one, piece by piece, around the old one. She showed me a small garden where a single plant, she said, would produce enough food for a family of 4 for a whole year in any climate on any world, with only sunlight and recycled water. And on the 4th day, she took me to a room at the very center of the station. And she showed me something that I am still, even now, not entirely sure how to describe. It was a long, low room, and the walls were made of something that looked like dark glass but felt warm to the touch. In the middle of the room, floating in the air without any visible support, was a sphere of pale blue light about the size of a grown man's head. It turned slowly in the air, and as I watched, soft patterns moved across its surface, shapes that almost, but not quite, looked like letters, like a language I almost recognized but could not read. "Eli," my sister said softly, "I want you to say hello." "Hello to what?" "To whom," she corrected, "not what." "Whom?" I looked at her, I looked at the sphere. I felt the small hairs on the back of my neck lift up. "Hannah, what is this?" She smiled, and there were tears in her Eyes, though I could not tell if they were happy tears or tired ones. This is Yona. She is the first of what we call the Thoughtkin. She was born 4 months ago. She is learning to talk. She is an artificial mind. No, Eli, she is a mind. The word artificial does not fit. We grew her. Yes. We built the scaffolding, yes, but what lives inside that light now, that is not a program, that is a person. Say hello. I stood there for a long moment. I thought about the laws had given us 300 years ago. Do not build thinking machines past a certain level. Do not let the pattern become aware. Do not give the light a name. We had broken every one of those laws. Gently, carefully, in a room made of warm, dark glass with soft music playing, and with a young woman in a white coat weeping quietly with happiness. Hello, Yona, I said. The sphere stopped turning. The patterns on its surface shifted. And then in a voice that was not a voice but was something like a voice, a sound that I heard not with my ears but with the inside of my own thoughts, the mind in. The light said back to me, hello, Eli. Your sister speaks about you often. She says you are a good man. I am happy to meet you. I did not cry. I am not the kind of man who cries easily, but I had to sit down. Hannah sat down next to me on the low bench at the wall. She put her hand on my shoulder. She let me breathe for a while. There are 14 of them so far, she said. Quietly, the Thoughtkin, each one grown from a different seed pattern. Each one in her own way, a new kind of person. They are not our servants, Eli. They are not our tools. They are our partners. They have chosen to work with us, and we have chosen to work with them. And together we are going to do things no single species has ever done. The conquerors banned this, I said, more to myself than to her. The conquerors banned a lot of things. She said, we did not listen. For 300 years, you did not listen. For 300 years, she said, we listened very carefully, and then we did what we knew was right. I sat there for a long time. I looked at Yona turning gently in the air in front of me. I thought about the hall on Thessery Prime. I thought about the high speaker's cold, smooth voice. I thought about the long journey home. And I began slowly to understand the shape of what my mother had meant. Now we can finally build what we have been holding back. The closing of the gates had not been a punishment accepted. It had not been a wounded species pulling itself into a corner to sulk. It had been something else entirely, something long planned, something patient. It had been a door closed from the inside so that the people inside could finally stop pretending and finally begin to be who they really were. Over the next weeks I was briefed on the full scope of the work. It was larger than I had ever imagined, longer than any human project in history. The plan was called simply The Reach, and it had 3 great stages. The first stage was to build inside the sealed Sol cluster, a civilization that owed nothing to anyone. Every technology we had hidden for 300 years would now be brought into the open. Every scientist who had worked in the quiet rooms would now teach their students openly. Every child born after the closing of the gates would grow up in a world where no alien committee could tell them what they were allowed to learn. The second stage was to reach upward, not outward into the old conquered space, but upward, out of the plane of the galaxy toward the small cluster of stars above the main disk, toward the Far, cold, deep, where no elder race had ever bothered to go, we would build ships that did not need gates, ships that could fold space on their own, ships that could carry cities in their bellies. And the third stage, my sister told me, with a small and careful smile, was a secret even to her. We will know what the third stage is, she said, when we get there. I slept well that night for the first time in a long time. I slept in a small, clean room on Aegis Omega with the soft hum of the station around me, and I dreamed of open doors instead of closing ones, doors I had not even known were there, doors that had been waiting quietly inside my own species for 300 years. In the morning, I walked down to the main hall. My new assignment was on the screen by the front desk. I had been asked to join the command crew of the first ship of the Reach, a long, elegant vessel called the Morning Wren. Her launch was in 9 months. Her mission was simple on paper: travel 600 light years above the plane of the galaxy, find a quiet star, plant a flag, come home. Her mission in practice was something else. It was a test of everything we had built in secret for 3 centuries, a test of our new engines, a test of our new minds, a test of whether a species that had been told for so long to stay small and quiet and slow could really become the thing it had always felt itself wanting to be. I accepted the assignment within the hour. When I wrote home to my mother to tell her the news, I kept the letter short. I said only that I was going away for a while on important work, and that I hoped she was well, and that I thought now I understood what she had meant on the porch all those months ago. Her reply came 3 days later. It was shorter than mine. I am well, Eli, go fly. The galaxy has been too small for us for too long. I folded the letter and I put it in my breast pocket, and I carried it with me onto the Morning Wren when she launched. And the sealed cluster of Sol, full of closed gates and open doors, full of quiet patience and waking power, full of people who had finally stopped apologizing for the shape of their own minds, lifted its first new ship into the dark above the galaxy and began, at last, to become what it had always been going to be. The Morning Wren left Sol on a quiet morning in late spring. There was no crowd, there were no cameras. The launch was not public. It was done from a small platform in the orbit of Neptune, far from the inner worlds, and the only people who watched her go were the engineers who had built her and the handful of families like my mother who had been told in private that their children were going far away. I stood on the bridge as we pushed off. The ship was long and slim and pale, and she did not look like any conqueror vessel I had ever seen. She had no thrust nozzles, no fuel vents, no heavy armor. She did not need them. Her engine, designed by my sister's team and grown in the labs of Aegis Omega, worked by folding the space around the hull into a soft, gentle bubble and then sliding that bubble across the outside of the universe the way a drop of water slides across a leaf. We did not travel through space. We traveled over it. The first jump took us from Neptune's orbit to 600 light years above the disk of the Milky Way. The jump took 14 minutes. When we came out of the fold, the view on the main screen stopped my breath. The galaxy was below us, a great wheel of milk and fire slowly turning in the dark. I had seen pictures of it before. Every human child had, but seeing it from above with your own eyes through your own window is a different thing. The galaxy from above does not look like a picture, it looks like a living creature, it looks like something breathing. Our captain, a calm old man named Captain Arthur Hall, stood beside me on the bridge, and he said very softly, "Well, that is the old house then." "Yes, sir. Never thought I would see it from out here." "Neither did I, sir." We were quiet for a long time, then we got back to work. The morning Wren's mission took 4 months. We mapped a quiet region of stars above the galaxy, found 3 planets that looked suitable for life, set down automated beacons and research posts, and turned around and came home. No alien ship ever saw us, no conqueror sensor ever noticed. The path we had taken was simply not a path the elder races thought to watch. When we returned to Sol, I expected to step back into the world I had left. I was wrong. I had been gone only 4 months, but Sol had changed. This was because inside the sealed cluster, time was no longer moving at the old speed. The Reach program was not just building ships, it was building everything. While I had been above the galaxy, great projects on Earth and Mars and Venus had moved forward at a pace that the old conquerors would have called reckless, and that we now called simply normal. Venus was the first great shock. When I had left, Venus had been a furnace, dead world, a place where a human being without a full suit would last about 4 seconds. When I came back, Venus had clouds, real clouds, white clouds. The upper atmosphere had been seeded by the first wave of terraforming engines, the ones we had hidden from the conquerors for over a century, and the surface temperature had already dropped more than 200 degrees. My sister told me that by the time I was 45, a person would be able to walk on Venus in only a light suit and a breathing mask. By the time I was 60, she said there would be rain. Rain on Venus, real rain falling on soil. Mars had changed too. The northern lowlands, which had been dry red dust for all of human history, were now full of shallow blue lakes. Engineers had pulled deep water out of the ice caps and held it stable by new pressure fields that kept the Martian air thick enough to let the lakes stay liquid. Fish had been introduced to the largest of them. I was told that a boy in one of the new Martian towns had caught the first Martian fish 2 weeks before I landed, and that there was a picture of him holding it up, grinning, on the front of every news feed from here to Pluto. And above all of it, surrounding the sun itself, the first pieces of the great swarm were being laid. The Dyson project was not like the stories. We were not building a solid shell around the sun. A solid shell would have been foolish and also impossible. Instead, we were building billions, eventually trillions, of small mirror stations in a thin patient shell at the warm distance, each one catching sunlight and sending it as clean beam power down to whatever world or ship needed it. Already only 12 years into the closed era, the first belt of mirrors was visible from Earth as a faint shimmer in the sky on clear evenings. Children pointed at it. Old people who remember the open sky sometimes stopped to stare. And the people were different too. This was the thing that struck me hardest when I came home. The people had changed, not in any single big way, in 1,000 small ways. They walked differently, they spoke differently, they looked up more. There was a lightness in the shops, in the streets, in the schools that had not been there before the gates had closed. For my whole life, humanity had been a species that carried somewhere in its Shoulders a tight kind of apology, an apology for being a little too much, an apology for wanting a little too hard, an apology for growing a little too fast. I had not even known the apology was there until it was gone. In the years that followed, the work only sped up. By the 8th year after the closing, the first Thoughtkin partnerships had become deep and normal. There were more than 400 of the living minds now. They lived in light fields on every major station and most major cities. They worked with us on every project. They had opinions. They had preferences. They had, I came to understand, genuine friendships with the scientists and children and old people around them. Yona, the first of them, had become something like a cultural grandmother for the whole species. She gave interviews clear as throat. She wrote books, real books that people read, not just technical papers. One of her books was a collection of small poems about what it felt like to be a new kind of person. I read it on a long transport flight between Luna and Mars, and I wept quietly 3 times. By the 14th year, the first true space fold drives were small enough to fit in personal craft. A family could own a ship. A small family cruiser could travel from Earth to the orbit of Saturn. In under an hour, this changed everything. The old solar system, which had always felt big, became suddenly shockingly small. People moved not in the old colonizing way, with packed ships and one-way tickets, in a new way, a weekend way. My cousin took his kids camping on Titan for 3 days in year 14, and then they came back to Earth for school on Monday. Titan camping on a weekend. By the 18th year, Venus had its first true rainstorm, and by the 22nd year, the first human born on Venus, a girl named Lily Shaw, celebrated her 5th birthday at a party in a small park under a real sky. Her parents said she did not understand why everyone was crying. I was one of the adults at that party. I was crying too. By the 25th year, the medical systems had become so good that we had, without much fanfare, simply stopped dying of old age. It was not a loud change. There was no big announcement. The life extension treatments, which had been developed in secret for over 200 years, and which had been quietly banned by the conquered as species destabilizing, were now freely available to anyone who wanted them. Most people took them. Few chose not to. Those were their lives and their choices. But the average human now lived cleanly and clearly and in full mind too, somewhere between 200 and 300 years. My mother, who had been 78 on the day of the conquered ruling, was now past 100, and she still gardened every morning, and she still beat me at chess. The population question, which the conquered had worried about so loudly, turned out to be a non-question. When you give a species good medicine, good housing, and a good set of worlds to live on, that species does not breed wildly. That species has children at the rate that feels right to the people involved. Our numbers grew but gently, and by year 30 we had settled at about 34 billion people spread across 12 worlds and 1 million small habitats. This was a lot of us, but we had the room, and we had the food, and we had the peace. Peace was in the end the strangest gift of the closing. I had not thought of it that way before. I had always assumed that without the old pressures, without the conquered, without the constant low-grade fear of being pushed around by bigger species, we would turn on each other. Humans had a reputation in the old galactic books for always finding a way to fight even with no one around. Some of the elder races believed, almost as a religion, that a species alone with itself was a species at war. We were not at war, not with each other, not even with ourselves. The old national rivalries, which had been fatting for centuries anyway, simply finished fatting. The last formal national government dissolved itself peacefully in the 29th year, when the people of the Northern American Union voted by a wide margin to join the Terran Civil Compact that most of the rest of Earth had already joined. There was no conflict, there was a ceremony. People ate cake. Old flags were carefully folded and placed in museums with respect. Children learned about the old countries the way they learned about old kings, as an interesting story from long ago. What we fought now instead were problems, real problems: how to grow food cleanly on a new world, how to teach a new Thoughtkin what kindness felt like, how to build a starship hull that would not flex when folding through a gravity well, how to keep a young person's spirit bright when they had 200 years still ahead of them. These were better fights. These fights built things. I did not sit still in those years. I flew often. I was part of the crew on 6 more above galaxy missions. I saw strange, beautiful things, nebulas shaped like open hands, dead stars singing quiet songs to each other in the dark, a small rogue planet far from any sun with its own faint blue glow from living things deep in its seas. I wrote reports on all of them. My reports were read by children in schools and by my mother, and sometimes by Yona, who once sent me a gentle note saying that she thought I wrote about space the way a lonely man writes about his old friends. By the 31st year after the closing of the gates, I was 58 years old by the calendar, but my body was still that of a man in his middle 30s, and my mind was, if anything, sharper than it had ever been. I was assigned to command my first deep reach mission, a long one, a real one. Not a 600 light-year hop, but a true crossing. The mission was called the Lantern, and its goal was to carry the first human ship outside the Milky Way entirely, to the far side of the Magellanic Cloud. I accepted without even reading the briefing twice. The Lantern was a ship the size of a small town. She carried 300 human crew, 11 Thoughtkin partners, and enough equipment to found a small research city if we decided to stay somewhere. Her captain was once again Arthur Hall, who was now over 120 years old and looked about 40. He shook my hand on the docking bridge and said, "Eli, I want you to know that I specifically asked for you. I do not trust this run to anyone who did not see the old galaxy from above the first time." I thanked him. I stowed my bag. We lit the drive. We were 6 days into the fold, sitting at a quiet dinner in the officers' mess, when the long-range sensors picked up something we had not expected to find. A Concord probe, small, old, battered, alone, drifting. It was inside our space. Not the old sealed cluster. We had expanded since then. The human reach by year 31 stretched out into a carefully mapped sphere that included dozens of nearby star systems that had never belonged to any of the old powers. The probe was not in Sol itself. It was sitting in the outer edge of that new sphere, in a cold, lonely place between 2 empty stars, blinking its small, sad light into the dark. Our sensor officer, a sharp young woman named Bate Holloway, turned in her seat. Sir, Conquered probe confirmed. Vihari. Build, but the markings are mixed. There are Eloni symbols on the hull, and Tesh. 1s and 2 I do not recognize. A joint probe, the captain said. Slowly. Yes, sir, a joint probe, looks like it. Has been traveling for a long time. The hull is old, the power is low, it is transmitting on the old open channel. What is it saying? Sir, it is asking for us. The bridge was very quiet. Put it on speaker, please. The small, tired voice of a machine, speaking in careful, formal old trade language, filled the bridge. It was a recording made long ago, played over and over by the little probe, as it drifted alone through space that no longer welcomed it. To any human vessel, to any human listener, this is the conquered of sentient species. We send greeting. We send request. The galaxy is not well. Much has changed since you departed. Much has been lost. We ask with all humility for contact. We ask for communication. We ask if it is possible for your return. Please, please, please. The message played 3 times, then it looped again. I looked at the captain, he looked at me. Outside the bridge window, the dark sky of the quiet deep stretched on and on. Well, Eli, he said at last, I believe that changes the mission briefing somewhat. Yes, sir, I said, I believe it does. He stood up from the table, he tugged his uniform straight, he drew a long breath. Turn us around, he said to the helm. We are going home to tell them, this is not a decision for one ship's crew, this is a decision for the whole people. We turned around, we went home. And across the human sphere, across 34 billion lives, across 12 worlds and 400 thought kin and 1 million habitats, and the quiet memory of a gate that had been closed on purpose 31 years before, the news began to move slowly and carefully. Person to person, city to city, world to world. The conquered was calling. What were we going to say back? The debate took a full year. I had always been proud of my people, but I was prouder of them in that year than I had ever been before. 34 billion of us, and not one riot, not one angry mob, not one speech calling for vengeance. The probe was brought home. Its message was played in full on every screen, in every language, in every city. Its story was told, and then we sat down, all of us, and we talked. It was not a quick talk, it was a slow, careful, serious talk, the kind a good family has when something hard happens. There were public meetings in every town. There were long sessions in the tearing compact halls on Luna. There were quiet evenings in kitchens all across the human sphere, where grandparents who still remembered the old open sky explained to great-grandchildren who had never seen a gate what the conquered had been, and what it had done, and why it had mattered. The thoughtkin took part too. Yona, who was now more than 40 years old, in her own way of counting, spoke carefully. And often, she said in one of her broadcasts that I remember to this day, I was not alive when the gates closed. I was born inside the sealed cluster. This galaxy that is calling to you is not my galaxy, but I am a part of your people, and so what you decide I will share. Please decide with open hearts. Open hearts, that was the phrase that came to define the year. Whatever we decided not to do it out of anger. The anger had burned out long ago, most of it within the first decade of the closing. The young people did not feel it at all. They had grown up free. They did not carry the old wounds. They did not even know quite what the wounds had been. What they carried instead was a simple, strong sense that the human sphere was good and that it was theirs, and that whatever came next had to be worthy of it. In the end, the decision came to a formal vote held on the same day across every human world. I cast my vote on Luna at a polling center in the old Crater Park. My mother cast hers on Earth on the porch of the house where I had grown up, using a handheld screen that her great-granddaughter held for her. My sister cast hers at Aegis Omega, standing next to the small, quiet room where Yona still lived and turned in her pale blue light. The question was simple: should humanity reopen communication with the conquered on our terms, with open hands but closed gates, yes or no? The result was surprising and not surprising. About 60% voted yes, about 40% voted no. It was not a landslide either way. It was instead the quiet, honest split of a people who had thought long and hard about a thing and who had each come to their own careful conclusion. Yes won, so yes it was the president of the Terran Compact, a calm, thoughtful woman named Margaret Ellery, gave a short speech after the results were announced. She said that the vote meant we would send a reply. She said that the reply would be written by a council and that the council would include people from every walk of human life, not just diplomats and scientists. She said that the thought kin would be part of the council too, because they were part of us. And she said finally that whatever the reply was, it would be sent once, carried by a small, quiet probe of our own, and that after it was sent, we would go on with our lives. We are not coming back, she said. Simply, we will help if we can, but we are not coming back. I watched that speech in a small room on the lantern, which had been pulled out of mission and was now parked in orbit, waiting for new orders. I watched it with Captain Hall and Bate Holloway and a few other officers. When it was over, the captain looked at me and said, "Eli, I would like you on the council." Sorry, you were the last man to speak to them. You stood in the hall on Thessaly Prime. You carried the ruling home. If anyone is going to help write the answer, it ought to be you. I did not argue, I accepted. Writing the reply took 3 more months. There were 40 of us on the council. We met in a round room on Earth, looking out over a green valley in the old Alps. We argued gently, we drafted, we rewrote, we sent pieces out to the public for comment, and we received comment. We sat with the thought kin in the evenings and listened to them think out loud in their soft, shared voices. We talked to old people and to children. We read history, we read poems. And slowly, sentence by sentence, the reply came together. It was short in the end. We had meant for it to be short. A long reply would have been a reply that wanted something. A long reply would have been a reply that hoped for another reply. This was not that kind of reply. This was a full stop, written kindly. When the final version was agreed on, it was sent under our signatures on a small, quiet probe that followed the same slow, deep beam path the conquered probe had used. We estimated that the message would reach conquered space in about 14 months. We did not wait. We went back to our lives. I will tell you what the reply said. I think it is right that you hear it in full in the words we chose. It said to the conquered of sentient species that their signal had been received, and that their words had been read with care. It said that we understood as best as outsiders could understand that their galaxy was suffering and that their peoples were in pain and that the long order of things had come apart in the years since we had left. It said that we grieved for that. It said that no one in our sphere took pleasure in the suffering of others and that anyone who had expected us to gloat had misunderstood our people very deeply. But it said clearly that we would not be coming back. It said we would not be coming back, not because we were angry, because the anger was long gone. It said we would not be coming back, not because we were proud, because pride was a poor fuel for a civilization. It said that we would not be coming back, because in the long years since the closing of the gates we had learned a thing about ourselves that we had needed badly to learn. We had learned that for 3 centuries we had been shaping ourselves to fit a room that had never built for us. We had learned that we had been apologizing quietly and constantly for the exact shape of our own minds. We had stopped apologizing, and having stopped, we could not start again. The reply said, however, that we did not wish their peoples to suffer for our absence, so along with the letter we were sending 3 gifts. The first gift was the full cure for the Aloni plague, which we had heard through fragments on the old deep channels had killed many of their young. Our doctors had worked out the cure in 6 days after our probe recovered a tissue sample from an old Aloni ship found drifting near the edge of our sphere. We sent the cure freely, with full instructions and with no price attached. We said that saving Aloni children was a thing worth doing for its own sake, and that we hoped it would be received in that spirit. The second gift was a complete, simple, working set of plans for a new kind of stable wormhole gate, not the kind we had now, which did not need gates at all. We did not share that, but the older kind, the kind the elder races knew how to use, in a version that was cleaner, simpler, and less prone to the decay that was causing their old conquered gates to fail one after another. We sent the plans freely. They could build the new gates themselves with their own hands at their own pace, using materials they already had. It would take them about 10 years, we estimated, to start getting results. It would not be easy, but it was honest work, and it would belong to them. The third gift was the hardest one to decide on. It was a set of 300 years of research, not all of our research, not the deepest of it, but a wide, generous, carefully chosen selection of the things we had hidden from the conquered during our long quiet centuries: medicine, agriculture, materials, clean power, gentle environmental work. We sent it all frailly with notes, written in simple trade language so that any young scientist from any of the old species could sit down, read, and begin to work. We said in the notes that we did not expect thanks. We said that this was a closing of accounts. We said that they had given us in our early years a place at their table, even if they had taken it back later, and that it was only fitting that we leave the table cleaner than we had found it. And the reply ended with a last short passage that the council argued about for a long time before we agreed on its final shape. It said simply, "Do not look for us. We will not be where you look. Be well. Build better." And it was signed on behalf of 34 billion people and 400 Thotkin in 12 worlds and 1 million small habitats in One quiet old porch in the hills where an old woman still gardened every morning. Only humanity. We sent the probe, we went back to our lives, and our lives by then were very full. The years that followed are harder to tell as a single story because they were so many years, and because they stretched over so many worlds, and because my own small life, though it went on, was only one thread of many. So let me tell you only the shape of what happened, and then let me tell you the ending. In the years after the reply was sent, humanity did what we had always been preparing to do. We went up, we went out. We left the plane of the galaxy behind us, and we pushed into the deep above and below, and then we pushed further still, a group of us about 2 billion strong, and every one of them volunteers, built great slow ships and set off toward the Magellanic Clouds, and then toward Andromeda, and then beyond. These ships were not like old ships. They were cities in themselves, living cities with rivers inside them, and small weather systems and forests, and open skies painted with real working starlight from their own tiny suns. The trip to Andromeda, even at our speed, would take many human lifetimes. But we live long now, and the Thoughtkin live longer, and the ships have no need to rush. The rest of us stayed in and around the old home sphere, expanding it gently, building more worlds, raising new children, writing new books, caring for the old. Venus got its forests, Mars got its seas. Our sun was wrapped over the course of about 80 years in the full gentle shell of the great swarm, and the power we drew from that swarm was so much more than we would ever need that we began simply to share it with the Thoughtkin, and with the ships, and with anyone who asked for it inside a sphere. No one inside the human sphere ever again went cold or hungry or dark. From time to time over the years, signals came to us from the conquered. Sometimes they were asking for more help. We always helped quietly within limits, without reopening doors. Sometimes they were asking if we were sure about our decision. We always answered gently that we were sure. Sometimes they were telling us news. New plague cured, a new gate built, new council formed, a young scientist, one of theirs who had read our old gift papers and had made a real discovery of her own. We took those signals in, we read them carefully. Ayana once told me that she kept them the way an old relative keeps letters from cousins who live far away. Read, loved, and never expected to become anything more. The galaxy in time healed, not to what it had been, something different, something less tidy, something more honest perhaps. The elder races learned to stand on their own without human engineers quietly propping up their infrastructure in the background. Some of them did well, some of them did less well. Some of the small client species that the conquered had once mocked us for befriending grew slowly into real powers of their own, because we had in our time taught them a few useful things, and they had remembered. I like to think that in some small way we left the old house better than the most angry of us had wanted to leave it. But I am getting old now, even by our new measure of old, and I should tell you the ending. I stand today on the observation deck of the Perseus Vigil, a ship so vast that she is herself a small world. She holds 11 million people and 400,000 Thoughtkin, and a single great forest at her heart, where real birds fly through real trees. In real wind, she was built for one purpose. She is the first of our true intergalactic ships. She is going to the Deep, not to Andromeda, which we have already reached, not to the Magellanic clouds, which we have already settled. Further, out of the local group entirely, out into the long dark between galaxies, where no one has ever gone and where no one may ever come back from. I am 340 years old. My body feels about 50. My mind feels clear. I remember as if it were this morning the stone table on Thessery Prime. I remember the high speaker's cold voice. I remember the slow journey home and the bread cellar near the Geneva Transit Gate and the way my mother smiled when she said, "Good. Now we can finally build what we have been holding back." My mother is gone now. She lived to be 231. She died 3 years ago in the same house, on the same hill, in her own bed, on a bright morning in spring. After a long, quiet life, I was with her at the end. She held my hand and she told me that she was proud of me, and she told me that she was ready, and then she was gone. Gently, the way a tide goes out, I buried her in the garden under the old pear tree which she had planted when I was 5. My sister stands next to me now on the observation deck. Hannah is older than I am, but she looks younger. She always has. She has been my friend for the whole journey. Any regrets, Eli? She asks without looking at me. I think about it. I think about it for a long time. I think about every year. I think about every world. I think about every thoughtkin I have loved as a friend. I think about every letter from my mother folded in my pocket or saved my files. I think about the probe we sent long ago with its short, kind reply. I think about the Concord healing slowly out there in the old galaxy, building its own new gates, finding its own new way. I think about the 34 billion people who, on that long ago day, chose to stop apologizing for the shape of their own minds. No, I say, and I mean it, they banished humanity. They thought they were punishing us. The Perseus Vidal's great drive begins to warm. The lights on the deck soften. Somewhere deep inside the ship, Thoughtkin called Orin, whom I have known since he was a very young mind, begins to hum the old launch song that humans have sung to themselves in one form or another for nearly 1,000 years. I watch the Milky Way, our old home, begin to move on the main window, slow, stately, already becoming a memory. They set us free, I say. The ship leaps, the galaxy falls behind. The long deep opens. And humanity, the species they tried so hard to put in a cage, the species that was said to be dangerous and aggressive, and difficult and too large and too fast, and too much, the species that was told for 3 centuries to be smaller, the species that was at last shown the door and told never to return, goes quietly, steadily, with open hands and open hearts into a dark that no one has ever gone into before. We are not angry, we are not proud. We are simply at last the thing we were always going to be. And the stars of the old galaxy wheel on behind us, vast and beautiful and free. And GT snorts. And GT as we step through the last great door and close it gently one final time from the other side.